Welcome to another episode in the District 6 Museum Vusalela Onsleiser podcast series. Today we're going to talk about an area known as the Dry Docks, which is located on the upper slopes of District 6. We will hear from Soraya Martheze. Soraya grew up in the Dry Docks and gives us a unique perspective into what life was like there, how they spent their days, and how forced removals in the Dry Docks in particular had a character of its own.
I lived in an area called Dry Docks, okay, which I'm still not, there's still a bit of a quibble around where the name came from. Okay, so I'm not sure exactly where the name came from. There was a few roads, heavily cobbled roads. So we were immediately below the Val Drive, or Philip Skosana Drive. So there was an area that was called the Boerdery and Onderdry. And it's because we lived at the top of the cobbled roads, and then the Silver Tree Youth Club, that was part of the Onderdry. So our road led into, the road that I lived in was Chatham Street. It led straight into the Silver Tree Youth Club. And behind the Silver Tree Youth Club, on the one side of it, there was, I think it was Reinbach and Geelong Streets. So that was called the Onderdry. Yeah. So although they did, I mean, there were lots of sporting events. There was the Silver Tree Rugby Club, and all the activities that happened at the Silver Tree Youth Club. So there was intermingling, but there was also kind of cliquish. You know, the Boerdery people, they stuck to themselves, and the Onderdry people. But there was intermarriage also between the people from the Boerdery, and I mean, it was like a 5-minute walk, up or down. Some people, so I lived in Chatham Street. My aunt lived in Rochester Road. And her house was, we were further down in Chatham Street. She was quite far up. She was very close to what was then called the Val Drive. And she had this big stoop, lovely house. And the name of the house was Eight Cape, because she had a magnificent view of the harbour. So what I was told is that it's called Dry Docks because you had the view of the dry dock in the dockyard. But there's another story to it, and I forget what it is. But there is another version of why it's called Dry Docks. With District 6 per se, like if I look at Facebook and I hear what people are saying, then there's a lot of things that I may have heard of, but I know the exact details around it. Yeah, so the Dry Docks they were pretty much living in a world of their own, probably. Yeah. I mean, Dry Docks it was Rochester Road, Chatham Street, Tilbury Street, and then I think Edith Road. Edith Road it looked like a road that came afterwards because it wasn't cobbled, and the houses seemed more modern, the design of the houses.
Soraya remembers the Dry Docks as having an ecosystem of its own. And while the Dry Docks formed a part of District 6, they did, like Soraya said, live in a world of their own. They did their shopping at the butcher and barber shops in the Dry Docks. They socialized in the Dry Docks. They went to school in the Dry Docks. And only on Saturdays did people make an outing of it to venture into the larger District 6 area to see some friends or do some shopping. But for the younger children of the Dry Docks, for Soraya and her friends, the streets was their playground.
The game I remember most is we called it was probably high and low, but we called it honey low with a skipping rope. We played that all the time. And then we lived next to a field. I have no idea why I did it. But both my parents worked. But I used to make these, I mean, I left Dry Docks when I was 10 or 11. But I remember making ice blocks to sell. Because I saw my mother making ice blocks. You put in a little, the dye that they use in the cakes, cochineal, I remember, was the red, my word. You're stretching my memory, eh? And you take milk, cochineal, and you take sugar, and you pour it in the ice block tray. And I cut squares of this greaseproof paper, and kids used to come and knock on the door, and I used to sell these ice blocks. And then hopscotch we used to play. That was another one. And then you used to get those games. I don't know if you guys played it, the boys' names, girls' names, where you pick a letter and you have to write a boy's name with a girl. Yeah, so we did something similar to that where you used to run and you had to have actors' names and actresses' names. So because I had the stage in cinema, I was like, I knew all these things quite well. And dodgeball, that was another one where you have to dodge the ball. You have two sides. And then, of course, hide and seek. We used to play that as well.
Soraya's childhood memories remind us how exciting life was for a child of District 6. But this childhood bliss would not last. At the age of 11, Soraya and her mother moved out of District 6 and into the Boer Cup. But that is not to say that she didn't witness the forced removals of 60,000 people from District 6, including her father.
I left District 6. My parents got divorced, so my mom and I moved to Boer Cup. And my father stayed in dry docks. So at the time that the people were evicted, I wasn't actually there. I wasn't in District 6, but I used to visit him regularly. When I started working, I used to come and visit my father. I worked at Norwich Union on the foreshore. Then I would leave Norwich Union. I would take the warmer bus, get off in Constitution Street. And at that time, people had started moving out already. So I think the warmer bus only operated until a certain time. I remember a few times I used to walk from dry docks back to Boer Cup. And it was like just before sunset kind of. But there were times when I was like, because it was quiet and there were abandoned buildings and people had been evicted already. But I was fine. Anyway, so one day I came and my brother-in-law brought me from Boer Cup. A few of my brothers, all my brothers-in-law used to take me to visit my father. So I go and I knock on the door. Now it was a 2-bedroom house that we had. The front room was the lounge and the second room was the bedroom. I had a fold-up bed. I don't know if you get those things anymore. It's a fold-up single bed next to my parents' bed, right? And there's this strange woman opening the door. And I'm like, I was stunned and confused. And so I say that, look, I'm coming to see my father. And they say, oh yeah, no, he is there. So the group, as we called it, which I think it was the Community Development Department, they had, it also doesn't make sense to me why they did that. So they used to bring people from District 6, lower down in District 6, that were evicted there. Then they bring them up to maybe dry docks. There were a lot of people that were shifted around before they were finally evicted. And they put my father in the 1 bedroom, and in the rest of the house was this family. Husband and wife and children. Same house. I don't see the logic behind it all. Who benefited from it? No one. Yeah, so because he was alone, he went with his older brother to Grassy Park. So they moved to, he moved with his brother to Grassy Park. The other brother also moved to Grassy Park, and a sister moved to Grassy Park.
It is not the first time we hear of people moving into another home in District 6 before they were removed onto the Cape Flats. Sometimes people moved into a home that was still occupied, like the family that moved into Soraya's father's home. But people also moved into the abandoned homes left behind by those who had already been forced out. The story of Soraya and her father highlights the complex nature of forced removals. It is always a precarious movement of people, which to this day can still be seen throughout the world. I'm Lisa Hendricks, and you're listening to another episode in the District 6 Museum Vusalela Ons Luister podcast series. No matter where we are here. The audio snippets used in this podcast are taken from the District 6 Museum archive. The stories produced through this podcast series and the opinions and statements that may be contained herein do not reflect those of the District 6 Museum, but rather the individuals hosted within this series. This program is funded by the Mellon Foundation.